Hey everybody, Fetty here, and welcome back to part 7 of my How to Build a Pole Barn series where we're putting on this metal roof. If you haven't seen the first part of this video, we'll go back and check it out because there's a lot of good information in there. If you have watched it, we'll just hop on because we're going to pick up right where we left off. So let's get started. Now I've pilot holed some of these screws, but I'm going to show you another thing that you can do. So I'm just tightening that up. I'm not wearing it out. You got to be careful too, because now, you know, if you're up here standing on this, as you stand on this, you'll mash that metal out and you'll distort it a little bit. So, keep in mind that you can, and it's good too if you need to cheat a corner in or something and need a little room while you can, mash that metal out and cheat it in a little bit, but it'll throw you way off too if you're not careful. Now I've left a couple of screws out, and I'm going to tell you another couple of techniques you can use if you don't want a pilot hole. You can take your little metal punch like this. You see this little punch? It's got a sharp point on the end. You can come in here to your mark and just kind of score it a little bit, and then take your screw . And start your screw that way. But really a better way that I think works just as well is, take your screw, find your mark, take your hammer, just kind of tap it a little bit, and what that'll do is it'll punch a hole in your metal, and then you just go ahead and put your screw in. There we are. So now it's time to go ahead and put up another piece of metal. And right here, as you can see, this is the side that has the long leg. Now remember, like I said, this is kind of a scrap piece that I got from the supplier. In the real world, that long leg is really probably only going to be, I don't know, 3/8 of an inch maybe, or something like that. So just bear that in mind. But at any rate, this is the side that has the long leg. Now when I put this next piece on, I'm going to take the side that has the short leg right there, and it's going to go on over top of that side, and that's how that seam is made. And as you can see, remember the wind's going to be blowing this way all the time? Well, the wind is going to be blowing over top of that seam right here, see? Instead of blowing this way up and under that seam. So that's kind of how all that works out. So when you get that other panel up, and a way that I found that would work pretty good is to get that panel up, get it lined up the way you want it, and go ahead up here at this top purlin and run you a couple of screws to kind of hold it in place, and then come on in here and start putting your screws in. There again, remember I could see the purlins running down through there. I knew where my screw holes were here. So I could take that framing square, this drywall square, and lay it up, come through, mark where my holes were going to be. Like I said, you could pre-drill these if you wanted to, but that's like proceed at your own peril, I suppose. So this way worked out pretty good for me. Now one little tip to keep in mind, as you're standing up here on this roof looking down, your orientation to that screw will be, like that, when it really needs to be like this to be screwing straight in to your metal and to your purlin. So just kind of keep that in mind, because if you run that screw in, at an angle, well, it'll blow the back of that washer out and it'll hink everything up, and that washer won't be able to do its job. So just, keep that in mind. Now I've already drilled for the sake of time and convenience, I've already drilled these panels. But like I said, you could use that metal punch or an 1/8 inch drill bit and pilot hole them yourself, or just take this screw and you hammer and tap a hole in it and start it that way. So that's how I got my roof on, and it turned out really good, and all my screws lined up really good, and like I said, I only missed a couple, so it worked out pretty good for me. Now chances are your end panel is not going to break right on the end of your truss, either because the math of a 3-foot panel versus the math of the width of your building doesn't work out, or you know, your trusses aren't perfectly square and plumb and all that kind of stuff. Chances are it's not going to break perfect. So you need to cut the end of that panel off. Now you don't got to get all wound up about it and do it perfect, because there'll be a piece of trim that's going to go over top of that. Now you can cut that with a 10 snip, but it is a pain. It takes a long time. Really, if you either have or have access to a pair of metal shears, that really makes life a whole lot easier. So let's go ahead and cut this end off. So I want to offer a word of reassurance to you about something that's probably going to happen. As you start putting these panels on, the more panels that you put on, you're probably going to start getting off your line down here at the bottom. And the reason is because these panels are perfectly square, but your building and your trusses and your fascia board, they're not. Now hopefully you'll have enough room at the top where you can start kind of maneuvering it down here at the bottom to bring it back in. But if you can't, the best that you can do is with each subsequent panel is start trying to cheat it back in and split the difference on it until you kind of get back in. And then later on it'll probably start drifting off again. But that's the best you can do. Now you're going to be freaking out saying, ooh, this looks horrible and everything, but here's the reality. If you're going to put a gutter on this, that gutter is going to be sticking out, and from the ground you're not going to see that. Now if you're not going to put a gutter on it, well then tell yourself it's a friggin' barn. So I just wanted to offer that word of reassurance to you because it happened to me on mine. Before we go too much further, let's take a minute and talk about the psychology of being up on that roof and working. Now I'm telling you, this metal right here is slick as a minnows dick, and you'll get to sliding on that and you can't stop, and you'll amaze yourself at just how deep fingernails can dig into 29 gauge metal. Now there's a time in my life when I'd have probably climbed up here with a pair of cowboy boots on and not thought much about it, but that time has long passed. But there are a few things that you can do to kind of make yourself feel safe and secure while you're up on that roof. And when you feel safe and secure, you do better work, or at least I do. One thing is when you're walking up there, if you'll be walking where your screws are, that'll do two things. One is there's a purlin underneath that screw, so it'll have more support under it. And the other thing is that screw will give you a little more traction, so that'll help you out a little bit there. Now the other thing that I did, and you can make fun of me if you want to, I guess I had my panties on that day, but I wore a safety harness. A real nice rig that you can, rig yourself into and snap into, and it's real secure. And I have a real nice safety rope, but you can lock that off on something and then lock yourself into it. And this one has this little unit on here where you can kind of slide it up and down and give yourself slack or take up slack, whatever you need to do. And that helped me feel like I wasn't going to slide off that roof, and I did better work because of it. Now another thing that you can use is this stuff right here, and I don't know what you call it, but this is that stuff that you put in the drawers of your toolbox. And when you lay this on that metal, now it really kind of bites in pretty good, especially if you have some weight on it. So it'll help you get good footing. So if you'll cut off a few pieces of that, it works really good when you're stepping off a ladder to have a piece right there when you step off onto the roof, and that way you can keep your footing. So that worked really good. Another thing that I did was I took a pair of old shoes and some of this 3M glue right here, and I sprayed the sole of those shoes and put some of that material on the shoes. And you know, I wore this part of the time and it worked pretty good. Really, if you have a good pair of work boots or tennis shoes that have a really good rubber sole on it, that'll go a long way to kind of keeping your footing while you're on this roof. And the last thing that you can do is get a pair of these gloves that have like a rubber coating on it, and that rubber coating sticks pretty good. So if you need to put your hand on that metal to reposition yourself, or if heaven forbid you start sliding and need to get yourself slowed down, these gloves will work really good to do that. So, you know, these are just a few things that you can do. Now, if you want to climb up there with a pair of cowboy boots, well, you have at it. I just can't do that no more. But either way, I just wanted to share these tips with you. So the next thing that goes on is this piece of Gable trim right here. Mine looks something like this. I've seen them look a little bit different, but generally this long piece right here will be on your gable. And what it does is it lays over the end right here, and it covers up all that mess where we had to trim it off. So let me get this tacked into place and then we'll talk about this. Now this is one of those where it's pretty helpful just to go ahead and drill you some pilot holes, because you're going through 2 layers of metal, and if you just try to run a screw, well, you'll get a screw through this one just fine, but then it'll kind of hink up when it gets on that panel. So drilling a pilot hole helps a little bit. Now up here at the top at the ridge, this is where I could have used another little hint, but the way I did it is I brought this piece of trim kind of up flush with the crest of the ridge right here. And then I had to kind of come in here and cut a little relief out. I mean, here was my thinking. I could have put that angle on it just fine, but I wanted to have some overlap when the next piece comes up. Now I've seen a technique where you take one piece and kind of break it down, and it looks really nice that way, but I didn't have pieces long enough to do that with. So anyway, I came in here and I kind of cut out a little relief right here. So when the next piece came in, of course I don't have purlins over here, it's going to be kind of hard to show, but when the next piece came in, it overlapped really nice, all my lines worked out, and it turned out pretty good. Now, you know, there's a piece of ridge cap that's going to be over this, so, you know, I'm not too concerned about how that looks. So that's how I did it, and like I said, there may be much better techniques out there, but it worked out just fine for me. Now normally you'd put you some screws along this gable every couple of feet, but I didn't do that because later this summer I'm going to break some trim, and I'll need to be able to get up in there to slide that trim metal up underneath this piece right here. Now once I do that, I'll come back and put me some screws in it. Now honestly, cutting this little piece on the end is where I could have probably used a tip or a hint from a metal roofing pro, because I'm sure there's probably a better technique. But what I did was I took my square and kind of used it to find the end of that roof panel. And then I kind of estimated what is straight up and down, made me a mark. Then I come over here, put my square on this way. Since I know this is a 4/12 pitch, I found 4 on my square and lined it up with the bottom of that piece so that I could find straight up and down and make me a mark. And then I carried my mark all the way across. Then what I did was I just took my 10 snips and I cut this piece out right here. So I cut. Then I came around to the other side and I cut out this part right here. And that's kind of flush right there with the end of the roof panel. Then I cut it along that bend right there, even with this line. Then I came down from that point representing the end of the panel down about, I don't know, about an inch, and I cut it off there. Then I folded this piece down. And I looked at the panel to kind of get an idea of what that angle was right there, so I could cut off that piece. Then I started working with this piece, just kind of folding it over and working it in and kind of rolling it up and under like that. And of course I worked with it until it, you know, kind of looked pretty good. Took a little hammer, maybe just tapped that piece in a little bit, and I got it looking pretty good, and I'm pretty satisfied with it. So now it's time to put this ridge cap on, and I used these little closure vents. And what they do is they kind of keep bugs and critters and stuff from getting up into your ridge cap there and causing you trouble. Now these things, they're adhesive. They got a sticky part on them, and they also have this little hump in there, and that hump corresponds to the ribs on your metal. Now the way you put these things on is you just come off the top of your metal a couple inches and just stick them on all the way across. Now I'm not going to install them here, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute. So now it's time to install this ridge cap, and this is where I almost had an uh-oh. This ridge cap is really wide. I think it's 13 or 14 inches wide, and my top purlins that run across the ridge there, well, they almost weren't set back far enough for me to have a surface to run a screw into. So keep that in mind. I think you can buy these in smaller pieces, but keep that in mind when you buy your ridge cap or lay out your purlins. Now installing this is about the same as everything else. You're probably going to have a seam in it, so you just want to make sure your seams are oriented so the wind's going to blow over the seam and not up and under it. And when you do seam it, I just laid mine in 2 or 3 inches, and that worked out fine. So really you're just going to lay this ridge cap on the top there, get it lined up real good, kind of keep it square on the apex of your roof there, looking good on the end. Then you just run your screws down into your ribs all the way across. Up in here is where you have that closure vent that'll keep the bugs and the critters out. So I'm not going to install this for real, and I'm getting ready to tell you why. The whole time I've been doing this video, I've been thinking, what in the world am I going to do with this when I get done with the video? Because I had to pay about 60 bucks to buy all this stuff, and I hate to waste it. And it occurred to me about 10 minutes ago that this would make a really cool overhang on that door on the side of the barn. So I'm going to save it and use it for that. So maybe way down the road one of these days there'll be a how to put an overhang on the side door of your pole barn video that we can all watch. So with this, we reached the conclusion of my How to Build a Pole Barn series. When I started this project, my goal was to take it all the way from breaking ground to getting the roof on. Now there's still work to be done on the barn. I got to pretty it up and get siding and doors and all that kind of stuff, and I may put some updates out about that along the way. But as far as my goal of this video project, mission accomplished, because now anybody on YouTube can see how to build a pole barn in the course of about an hour and a half. But folks, that's the magic of Hollywood. This project took a long time and it was hard, but it's something I can be proud of because I did it with my own hands and my own tools and my own time. And for me, it's not about saving the money. It's about that feeling of satisfaction that I get when I get to the end of a project like this. Now I'm thinking about putting out one more pole barn video where I can talk about what's on everybody's mind. How much did this thing cost? So talk about costs and materials and, you know, do-overs, and I wish I'd have thought about that kind of stuff. So stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoyed not only this video but the whole pole barn series. Hope you got something out of it, learned something, got some of your own ideas, and found your own inspiration. As always, if you like my videos, no matter how long they are, remember, give me a thumbs up, leave me some comments, and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching. It's going to be seamed somewhere. No, that ain't what I wanted to say. But as far as getting it on there and forgot what I was going to say. Now when you put it down, mine has a I got this cold. Then just took a stapler, then just and it's got a little washer, a little gasket on it. No, that's blurry, or is that my eyes?